Let's review the Data-Driven Advisor Monte Carlo Withdrawal Simulator. After reading and accepting the disclaimer, you can click this Accept button, and we get to the first page where we have inputs. We can save client instances, so you can go back to it later. Now, I'm not going to review every input on this page. I'll just show you the commonly used things. The first question is, do we want to analyze one portfolio or two portfolios against each other? I'm going to start with just one portfolio. We input the dollar amount of that portfolio. We're using $3.5 million. And then we have to construct the portfolio. As you can see, there are many different types of options to put in here. And we have to make that portfolio equal 100%. Time period for the portfolio charts, I'll show you in a little bit. Annual returns or 12-month, I'll show you in a little bit. Investable years, for how many years do we want to run this simulation? I'm giving this client 40 years. Do you want to remove inflation or not? I usually choose to remove inflation. I like to think in constant dollars. If this client thinks they're going to be withdrawing $120,000 per year, I like to keep that constant. Thus, I remove inflation from historical returns. You can choose to do that or not. And then we can input our annual withdrawals going forward. When we click on the Survival tab, this is the outputs. We get a number of different data points. How often did the portfolio last the 40 years or however long we wanted it to run for? How many years did it last on average? How often did the portfolio increase? The long-term risk and return of that portfolio and mean ending portfolio. What I like to do is look at that. How often did the portfolio last 40 years? I will keep clicking the refresh button, and we can see that number change. It gives us a sense of our range of outcomes. This portfolio seems to be lasting in the low 70%. Down here we have 20 random potential outcomes. This gets more interesting when we're comparing two portfolios against each other. We could go down here to the risk and return chart. The big dot is the long-term average of that portfolio, and we can see all the different portfolio periods, and what we're showing here is rolling 10-year periods. There are a number of different options we can choose from. And when we come to the bottom, we can see the distribution of outcomes for the portfolio to get a sense for what our outcomes might look like. One thing I think is usually interesting, if I go back here and compare two portfolios, what I'll often like to do is, first of all, I'm going to make the portfolios the same exact thing for this purpose. Now that the portfolio composition is the same, I can look at what happens to the client if we change his projected withdrawals. What we want to try to do is impart some knowledge to the client of what is the effect of, for the first 4 years, what if he wants to withdraw $200,000 or so versus $120,000 or $130,000 for those first 4 years, and then we'll keep the rest of it the same. When we go up to the survival rate, we can now see what difference that decision makes. Do you want to go from high 60s, low 70s to the high 50s? That is what the client is really trying to decide, is do you want to make that decision? And this is one variable we can think of when we're debating how much should we take from the portfolio and what are the differences when we increase our withdrawals 10,000, 20,000 per year for a certain number of times. If we go back to the inputs page, what's also interesting is comparing different portfolios to each other. So if we look at US stocks versus a globally diversified portfolio, and we could come down here, instead of rolling 10-year periods, it's interesting to look at 12-month periods to see every single 12-month period. There are almost 600 of them to look at. When we come back here, we can see not only are there very different range of outcomes. The green is the S&P 500 and the blue is that diversified portfolio. When we keep clicking through, we can see which of these has a lower range of outcomes. But what we can also see is the difference in 12-month periods between the two portfolios. We're always trying to go towards the top left, low risk and high return, and visually this can become very striking when comparing two different investment options. And then we can come down here and look at the distribution of outcomes. This works just as well if you're comparing different portfolio constructions and different withdrawal rates over time. But when you're looking at different portfolio constructions or withdrawal rates, when you're clicking refresh, you can really see how much of a difference there is between these two portfolios or different withdrawal rates. And that concludes our primer on the withdrawal simulator.